What is going on, Hive Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and today we're going to talk about if you can do a high carb diet while doing intermittent fasting. Can you be effective with a high carb diet and intermittent fasting and still do optimal fat loss or still get good amounts of fat loss even though you're incorporating a high carb diet? And that's the question that I'm going to tackle in this video. Stay tuned. Okay, let's jump right into it, guys. Can you do a high carb diet on intermittent fasting, and will it be effective? Now, I know that in many of my videos I always push to try to go the lower carb route because it's kind of like a stacking effect. Intermittent fasting in and of itself is very effective, and then depending on what you're eating, you can increase its effectiveness by pushing more of the elements of where intermittent fasting is taking your body hormonally. For example, the glucose. Certain things turn into glucose when you consume it. The moment you put it into your body and it goes into your bloodstream, it'll transfer into glucose, and those things are carbs and those things are sugar. The other macronutrients like protein and fats can also turn into glucose, but most of it doesn't turn into glucose as aggressively as carbs do, and definitely not as aggressively as sugar, with fats having the least transferable percentage of glucose in your body, and then protein being second. So what's the answer? It's a little bit more nuanced than a yes or no. I do want to give you a yes or no answer, but I do want to explain myself a little bit more and let you somewhat come to a conclusion. The hormonal aspect of fasting is extremely important, if not the most important, when it comes to the body weight reduction. Personally, I feel that calories matter, of course, but the hormonal aspects are much more important because it allows you to target the specific calories that you're burning, which is body fat. So you have to take into account what is the high carb diet that you're incorporating. And by high carb, I simply mean that you have more carbs than all the other macronutrients in your full calorie breakdown. So if you're consuming 1700 calories, most of that will be coming from carbs. That's what I'm defining as a high carb diet, not an exclusively carb diet or an aggressively high carb diet. Just that carbs is the macronutrient that you have the most percentage of over all the other macronutrients. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about ice cream and cake, or are we talking about potatoes, rice, and bread? Or are we talking about vegetables? All carbs are not the same. Things like ice cream and cake are doubling up on the glucose because not only are they carbs, they also contain sugar. Can you do it? You can. Will it be effective? It will be, but it wouldn't be as effective if you didn't eat such an aggressive glucose heavy food. Well, what about potatoes, rice, and bread? Those are also still simple carbohydrates. They're not as bad as doubling up with carbs and sugar. They're what I call tier 2. Tier 3 is the worst. Tier 2 is so-so, and then tier 1 is the best because complex carbohydrates can get broken down much faster and they tend to carry a lot of nutrition. So it's good to be able to consume complex carbohydrates like vegetables over simple carbohydrates. But moving back to the rice, potatoes, and bread, can you consume those items? You can. And the best thing that you can do to get yourself in a position where you could consume those items is to ensure that you're as fat adapted as possible. So you actually could prep yourself for those kind of items by not consuming them in the beginning. Use about a month to get into a better fat adapted state. You can consume some carbs, but try to make carbs the lowest percentage in your macronutrient breakdown, just so that you can kind of position your body, move your body into that insulin sensitivity range using exercise, building muscle, and intermittent fasting. All three of these things will help you become more insulin sensitive, which then helps you become more fat adapted because your body is utilizing body fat for energy. So the more you're using the intermittent fasting protocol and the more that you're exercising and building muscle and doing things that promote insulin sensitivity, you can move yourself towards that range where you start to become fat adapted. It's at this point that it's safer to tap into those kind of carbs, the simple carbs, but still try to implement things like exercise and building muscle. Basically, what you want to do is, because you're consuming the carbs, you do want to have a counter arsenal to the fact that you are consuming carbs. If you want these food items items to be part of your routine of what you eat, you have to ensure that you're doing the other things so that you can drop your insulin to baseline as fast as possible, because that's the goal. The reason why sometimes I promote to reduce your carb intake is simply because I want you to get into an insulin baseline position as quickly as possible so that you can start burning fat. Remember, just because you stop eating doesn't mean your insulin dropped all the way down to baseline. It takes some time. It takes a few hours, and these hours are predicated on how much glucose you have in your system, because if you have a lot of glucose in your system, it has to make sure that all of that moves to all of the different body parts, like your brain, your liver, your heart, all those different body parts that require it. If you have a lot of glucose, it has to disperse a lot of it so it stays up for a long time. If you have a little bit of glucose, it will move down faster. But if you're insulin sensitive, your insulin is extremely effective at moving glucose faster. And that's the reason why having as little amount of carbs as possible can assist you. But if you do consume carbs and you're insulin sensitive because you're doing cardio, because you're lifting weights or doing resistance training, your insulin then becomes super effective in moving that glucose quicker so that it can start going down faster. Just a recap for those of you who don't know what an insulin baseline position is, it's after your insulin shoots up. The moment you consume anything that has glucose, your insulin will shoot up, and then it will move down very slowly as it's dispersing all of this glucose. It also does something that you don't want. It blocks the potential for body fat removal at this point. Once it gets all the way down to baseline, that's when it unlocks the potential for your body to use body fat, because you haven't eaten or consumed any glucose during this time frame. Until you consume glucose, your insulin won't shoot back up. Although fats are used predominantly to get you into ketosis, fats can still transfer some of its percentage, a very low percentage, but some of its percentage into glucose when it enters your body. So all the three macronutrients carry glucose. So basically, not eating anything, intermittent fasting is the most effective way to tackle your insulin. Adding a ketogenic diet simply stacks on top of that by making your insulin not have to move up so high so that it can come down much faster. Complex carbs like vegetables, it has its benefits and can be broken down much easier. So if you're going to do a high carb diet and it's vegetables, it's kind of a no-brainer to choose vegetables over tier 2, which is bread, potatoes, rice, those kind of carbs. And then of course tier 3. Tier 3, I would say in a sense you can, but you have to understand your body. If it's hard for you to lose weight, even if you're doing intermittent fasting on its own, you just might not be as fat adapted, so your insulin is taking longer to get down. In that position, I would say no. Try to reduce carbs as much as you can and try to increase fats as much as you can. But if you're in a situation where you are consistently burning fat and you are effectively burning fat, then yeah, you can go ahead and do something like breads and the rice and potatoes. You can go ahead and consume those, but I would also counteract the glucose that's going into your body by exercising, by doing cardio, by lifting weights. Combining those two elements so that you can increase your insulin sensitivity so you can move that glucose quicker when it goes into your body, and thus still burning fat somewhat effectively while utilizing a high carb diet. I hope this video helps you guys. I know that, carbs are viewed as like absolutely evil when it comes to the intermittent fasting community, but if you desire to have carbs, if you want to have a higher carb diet, is it the end of the world? No, but just make sure that you're positioning yourself in the best way possible so that you can go ahead and consume that and still be somewhat effective in burning fat. Because that's the ultimate goal when it comes to intermittent fasting, is that you're focusing your calorie reduction from your body fat as opposed to all the other calorie storages in your body. And I want to thank my patrons from my Patreon, and I'm going to put their names right up here. And of course, I have warriors. As always, I'll see you on Sunday for another FAQ. Peace!